Going to continue our look at the Spanish settlements and life on the missions, and that's what this video is going to focus on, is daily life in the missions. And first, before we do that though, let's look at this map that shows, the missions throughout Texas and some areas right outside of what is considered current Texas borders. So we can see that we've got in the East Texas, we've got quite a few missions, including one even into what is present day Louisiana, where you can see that Spain is trying to keep control over this territory because of the threat from La Salle and the French. They recognize that they need to shore up their boundary lines and hold this territory, which as we talked about in the previous video, the purpose of the missions was to gain control of the territory. We see that they're spread out throughout if we look at Texas, if we drew a line here and only considered this North Texas and this South Texas, this would be South Texas, but of course, this is not the area that we would normally consider South Texas, but the southern 2/3 of Texas perhaps is where we see where we see the missions. Of course, we see lots of missions around the San Antonio area. And one of the other things we notice is the missions are always along rivers because water is absolutely necessary for our survival. And so if you're going to set up a mission somewhere, you might as well set up somewhere where you're going to have access to water. Now, what was daily life like? Well, life on the missions was a life of prayer. There was work to be done in the fields or workshops, and there would be many different types of workshops, whether it would be that of baking bread, of a grist mill, of a blacksmith shop, of a basket weaving shop, many different types of workshops that may exist, carpentry. Partly it would depend upon the natural resources of the region. There could be pottery that is being made. Like it says, some of that would depend on the natural resources of the region. Some of that would just be necessary in any place. There's always going to be a need for food, so there's certainly going to be kitchen work and things of that nature to be done. There's always going to be a need to grow food, and so there's going to be work to be done in fields. Children would attend schools, attend the school, and in that school there would be certainly the learning of Spanish and then religious instruction, and much of that would focus on the Bible. Who lived there in the missions? Well, when it comes to the Spanish, it would be priests or friars that were there. Franciscan priests or friars were there. And then, of course, their hope was that Native Americans would be there as well. That sometimes was more successful than others, but that was the hope, and those are the people that would live at these missions. Finally, what are the problems that these missions faced? Well, natives would run away. They would come, maybe there was an enemy nearby, and so many Native Americans might come to the missions, which were often near a presidio, so that would provide some protection. And so they may show up when there was danger nearby and they didn't feel like they could adequately defend themselves. And then once that danger was gone, they might leave, or perhaps there was a time of difficulty finding food, and so they would show up for food. And then once they felt like they were over those issues and they could then go back to their more normal, their way of life, return to their way of life, they would run away. So those could be some reasons why they would both show up and then run away. Perhaps they just ran away because they thought they might like this way of living. They saw some of the things that the Spanish had, and they recognized some of those things were valuable to them. Certainly the weapons that they saw that that the Spanish soldiers had would have been things that they would have been interested in. And so they might come to see how these things were made and and learn what they could. Many natives did not convert to Catholicism. Some did, but many did not. They would keep their own religion, depending upon the various indigenous groups that they were a part of. They had various religious rites and beliefs. And then finally, and this is probably the most significant, certainly the most significant when it comes to North and South America, is natives are exposed to diseases. And this is what we get back to with the other lessons where we talk about the Columbian exchange. The Columbian Exchange, we think of starting with Columbus because it does, but it continues on. Every time a new people group, a new Native American group, a new indigenous population, especially comes into more close contact with Europeans, there is danger of being exposed to disease and the spreading of disease. And as was talked about before, this leads to massive population decline for the Native Americans. And so millions and millions of Native Americans die as a result of these diseases. This was not purposeful on the parts in general. Occasionally, there have been times throughout history where people have exposed another people to a disease purposefully. But in this case, the exposing to the disease was not purposeful, but it was tragically just a devastating to the populations, the indigenous populations of North and South America and Texas as well, or I should say included. So, and then finally, what is the cultural impact of the missions? Well, the Spanish impact in Texas is various and wide, but as far as the missions go, the biggest cultural impact is that the Catholic religion is still alive in Texas today. Somewhere between 15 and 20% of Texas population is Catholic or claims claims the Catholic faith and says that they are Catholic, and so we have a large percentage of our population is Catholic still today. And even some of the missions in Texas are operating as the missions from this time period are still operating as parishes today, as active parishes today. So we will talk more about missions in future lessons, but that is kind of mission life and the impact of missions in Texas.